Bem-vindos to one more episode of the Type Theory for All podcast. As always, this is your host Pedro Abreu, and in this episode we have a very deep conversation with Jan de Muijnck-Hughes. In the first half of this episode, he will be introducing himself and all the cool research he has done with idris, hardware, and many different kinds of very interesting type systems such as session types, quantitative types, graded types, and so on. The second half, we will be talking about all the different kinds of problems that PL academia has been going through lately and what we as a community can do to address those issues. There is actually so much to talk about all this that we had to split this episode in two. So hopefully next week I'll be able to release the second part of this conversation where we get more in depth about the technicalities of his research. Now, before we start the episode, I have exciting news. We now have a Discord server. That's right. In this Discord server, we can now have a closer engagement with you guys, our beloved listeners. We can now discuss the content of the episode, share knowledge, or just hang out and talk. I don't know. The cool thing about this Discord is that now our patrons will be able to send questions to our featured guests. So for example, late August, I'm already scheduled to interview Leo de Moura, the creator of Z3 and Lean. And so our subscribers can have exclusive access to send me their questions that they would like to hear from Leo. So if you want to be part of this exclusive family that we are creating, go to our website, typetheoryforall.com, and subscribe to our Discord server. If you want to be even more exclusive, don't forget to donate to our Ko-Fi and become a Patreon. So now let's get into this episode. All right. Welcome everyone to one more episode of the Type Theory for All podcast. Let's hope that I'm not going to butcher his name too much today. But with me here, I have Jan de Muijnck. I think I pushed it a little bit. Well, welcome to the show, Jan.
Hello, thank you for having me, Pedro. And
Do you wanna correct me?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to correct you. That was a nice effort. We've practiced this a few times before we started recording, right? So my name is Jan de Muijnck-Hughes. I am Dutch Welsh, but raised in Scotland. So there's a lot of interesting things with my name and who can say it right and who can say it wrong. And if you're Dutch, you can say pretty much 90% of my name right, but part of my last name wrong. And if you're British, well, just the last bit's fine.
Yeah,
well,
in this case, go on.
There's always this nice icebreaker. How do you pronounce somebody's name?
It's true. So, Jan, I want to start by asking you to tell us your story with, type theory, dependent types, and being a user of idris.
Cool, thank you. So my story starts a long time ago when I was an undergraduate at the University of St. Andrews. Now, I'm quite a late stage PL enthusiast. So when I did my undergraduate, I was more interested in things like distributed systems. I liked logic, but I was more interested in crypto. So this was when crypto meant proper crypto and not what we see nowadays. And funnily enough, one of my biggest mistakes there was I skipped out on doing a course on logic specification and verification with James McKenna, who some people might be aware of.
Yes,
and his
I had some
post,
drinks with him
yeah,
sometime, and he is a very interesting person with a lot of, he really lights the room.
he does. He is very nice. And his postdoc at the time, or not necessarily his postdoc, but a postdoc at the department called Edwin Brady. And Edwin Brady is, as many people might know, is the originator of the Idris language. Now, I didn't really know Edwin at the time, and I still wasn't into PL at the time. So I finished my undergraduate, and I went off to be a master's student at the Radboud Universiteit Nijmegen in the Netherlands. And not to do PL, even though there's a very good PL group at the Radboud who are very interested in the clean language, but I was doing their computer security masters. And James McKenna happened to be there as well at the same time, and we had a few chats. But then I still wasn't into PL. So once I did my masters, it took a bit longer than I wanted it to, but that's something we can talk about later on, which is about burnout and mental health. But after that, I went back to St Andrews to do my PhD, originally looking at crypto in the cloud. Mostly I was interested in systems such as predicate-based encryption, where it's a radically different concept. Well, I say it's radically different. It's been around for a long, long time, but it's just what everyone knows about crypto is fundamentally different. I don't really want to talk into much about it now, but I was doing my PhD there looking at software engineering and how we can use these cryptographic systems in the cloud and what that means and how we can do that. But I happened to meet a man in the bar, and that man was Edwin Brady. And he took on a somewhat pastoral technical role in my PhD. And he was not, most people think that he was my principal supervisor, but he wasn't. It was somebody else called Ishbel Duncan who was into security, and she is, well, I say was, she has retired. I think she's still alive. Well, we'll hope so. Uh, she was really great at pastoral care and looking at larger, big picture with the PhD, but Edwin was more of a technical one. And we were talking about languages. I was interested in design patterns, and I still am interested in design patterns on what are the programming idioms we have in our languages and how can we communicate them to other people. And to be very clear, I like the Gang of Four patterns because they addressed a problem in object-oriented languages. And we sort of see the same sort of notion of there are problems to be solved in, say, functional language independent types that we need to encode. But the encoding is not just the formalism, it's not just the UML model, there's a whole description end of it there. And this segues nice into my PhD because I thought, well, look, I want to reason about design patterns, but more so on their requirements analysis. And that was one thing that I was interested in, I still am interested in. And I was thinking, right, how do you reason about these design patterns? And I looked up things called requirements models and right, I would like to formalize that. I want to create a domain-specific modeling language to capture these requirements. And I didn't know what to do. And so I was chatting to this man in the bar, Edwin, and he suggested, I should chase the dragon. And that is look at doing dependent types because they provide a really, really expressive environment to reason about our programs. And long story short, I started looking at dependent types. I had a very bad TFP idea and presentation in 2014, but that sort of set off my exploration on using dependent types to reason about models and later on verifying systems. And this whole type-driven technique is wonderful, and I really enjoy using it. And from then on, I sort of ramped up. I left my PhD for 6 months, not to do with burnout, but because I was asked by Edwin and another professor at St Andrews to work on a 6-month project investigating how we can use dependent types and behavioral types to reason about systems that are, COT systems, commercial off-the-shelf systems. And the idea being that if you are in a in a very secure system, you don't want to re-implement everything, right? So you might want to buy in software programs that from the outside, right? Because somebody's done all the work. You should be able to, it makes a lot of sense in certain situations to say, look, here's this existing piece of software, let's bring it in and let's run it. But if you're in a trusted execution environment, well, you want to make sure that these systems do what they say they do. And so part of the project I was involved in is like using Idris, using dependent types, and using what is called behavioral typing to not reason about the computation of our programs, but about the behavior of our programs with respect to communicating across the wire. And in this case, it was for inter-process communication. And what we looked at was this thing of being inspired by session types. And now session types are really cute or really neat, whatever, wonderful typing discipline to sort of to reason about the messages that are being sent across the wire. And we sort of took that and we used that to build what we called behavioral firewalls. So you'd run your process in a firewall, in our program, and we'd have an external specification that says, right, these are the allowed behaviors that your program should do. and we will compile a program statically using the dependent types and the types that are inspired by session types to ensure that only the allowed communications can happen. But at runtime, we can then detect if an unallowed communication is happening and report that. And this was a small 6-month project, but it just opened my eyes up to a wider stage of going from building modeling languages to doing more computational research and going away from the software engineering side to the programming languages side. And then with that 6-month break, I didn't restart my PhD, but I got back into it with a bit more vigor and saying, look, let's use dependent types more, right? And that was great. And so in the final years of my PhD, I looked at using dependent types to build domain-specific goal-oriented modeling languages and what that meant. It's a bit of a mouthful, but essentially there are these languages called goal requirements languages where you can reason about your requirements as a directed graph, and there are weights on the graph, and how you set up the graph with weights and values on each node will allow you to infer or detect information about goal satisfaction. Okay, I'm not going to go too much into that, but the whole idea was that you have this host language or modeling language. You say, right, that's great, but it's very general purpose. But I want to do something with design patterns. And I think goals and satisfaction is a nice way to model problems and solutions. And when you have a problem, this could be such as, you need, the problem could be, you have unauthenticated user access. You can say, well, the solution would be to use access control. But you want to sort of model the interplay between these requirements and solutions. But the goal requirements language is not necessarily expressive enough to capture all the domain-specific terminology. And so you want to be able to say, look, have a more bespoke domain-specific language that can then map down to the goal requirements language or to your meta language. And that sounds an awfully like, I would say abstract interpretation, but it is an interpretation, okay? And the way I use dependent types, I'll say, right, cool, let's index our types, because we are an independently typed system, with our modeling language, which is be the meta modeling language, so we can design our domain-specific modeling language with respect to your meta modeling language. And so if you try and do any interpretation, I'll restart. So if you start building up your terms and specifying them, you have to specify the type in terms of your meta modeling language at the type level and your domain-specific language at the value level. And what the dependent types allow you to do is to have this isomorphism or intrinsic link between the meta modeling languages and your domain-specific language, so that if you try and write something that's wrong, ends up being wrong in the modeling language, like because of the interpretation, that will be detected at compile time. And with that, you can have much more confidence that your domain-specific language is correct with respect to your meta modeling language. And to take it as an aside, you sort of see this with some of the work from Graham Hutton at Nottingham University. Okay, so he has a long line of ICFP papers on constructing compilers. And there's that same notion of like they do this interpretation at the type level of what they're doing, and you can create these nice links between what you do at the value level and what you do at what you do at the type level. And Wouter Sverster actually has a nice functional Perl in the JFP on doing something quite similar, and it's quite a nice little technique. Now, right, so that's the PhD. So what happened after that? I said it's a long story. So after my PhD, I was looking for a job, and I was fortunate enough to become a teaching fellow at the University of St Andrews. They needed someone to teach distributed systems for 8 months. And this came at the perfect time of submitting my PhD in December, having a job for 8 months to not only have my viva, but then to do the corrections and not have to worry about what I'm doing afterwards. And that was a wonderful, nice time, because I could then just get heavily involved into teaching and something which I am passionate about without having to think about what am I doing for research, what am I doing for money. I can actually concentrate on the job and do my corrections. Now, along the way, Edwin, a long-time collaborator, said, look, I've got my first grant which in the UK terms is now known as a New Investigator Award. It's what every new lecturer is able to apply for from the British Research Council. And he was like, look, I need a postdoc, or I prefer the term research associate or research fellow, but I can't name you on it, but you have to apply for it. And I was like, cool, that's fine. He told me about it and I applied for it and I got the job. And that was to look at taking our idea of these behavioral firewalls, of using dependent types and things that look like session types to reason about the behavior of third-party programs. I said, right, so instead of doing it for third-party programs, let's do it on the programs we want to write. And that was quite cool. And so I had a research associate's job for 1 year because that was the duration of the grant funding. And there, it was just taking the data, right, instead of writing these wrappers around processes, let's try and say, look, can we use the power of algebraic effects in Idris and session types and sort of mix them together? Now, we actually didn't use algebraic effects explicitly. It was more effects, because if you're somebody like Sam Linley, then algebraic effects are only when you have the algebraic properties associated with the effects. Now, effects and effect handlers are really interesting in that if you're familiar with programming with interfaces from, say, Java or module systems, whatever, the idea there is or type classes even, the idea there is that you program against descriptions of what's going to happen. And at a very conceptual level, high level, and I'm sure a lot of listeners more advanced practitioners will say, this is, it's not quite right, but I think intuitively I like this in that you're programming against interfaces that's saying, look, here's how your terms behave, and they might be effectful. So if you're doing file I/O, if you've got exceptions, if you have console input output, if you have even logging, right? Because logging is important in that, we can use, first of all, we can use dependent types. So Edwin had an ICFP paper on how to have I'm going to call it a pure implementation of effects in Idris. So you don't need language extensions, which is one of the beauties of dependently typed languages. You can write your own language extensions without having to hack the compiler. And we use this setup to design effects to reason about the communication of our programs agnostic to the context and the communication context in which it was running. Okay, so when we talked about effect handlers, so the effect was called the message effect, and that said, look, right, you're going to do a communication with someone, but I don't know what's going to happen at the transport level. Right? You could be doing inter-process communications. We could be spawning threads. We could be doing network communication and communicating to the United States. We could also be just spawning our own threads and doing something there. And we say, look, we don't care what you do. What we care about is, are you sending or are you receiving? And this is where the session types come in, and they say, look, you can then have that ordering of when are you doing a send, when are you doing a receive, and that's what session types give you, is that typing discipline to reason about that statically. But we use the effects handlers to separate that description of what's going on with the actual handling for a specific communication context. So when you run your program, you can say, right, I'm doing IPC now, I'm doing networking, I'm doing this other communication context, have at it, which is quite a Scottish term to say, let's get on with it. Okay, and so I was looking at that, and I was looking at the interesting interplay in this. So for session types, for those not aware, so you have the standard binary session types where you are just having a sender and a receiver, but you also have what is really cool multi-party session types, where multi-party is when you have more than two participants in your protocol. And if you're in a dependently typed language, you can do lots of cool things about reasoning about values and promoting that up to have value-dependent session types, but there is a correctness issue in that you could accidentally depend on knowledge you haven't received yet. And part of what I was looking at was trying to do a mechanization of using the dependent types to sort of say, look, you could only send values and reason about values as a participant that you've already seen. And this links in nicely with some theory work from decades ago from Bernardo Tejinho, who's at Nova in Lisbon. I think it was Nova. I know he's in Lisbon. He's Portuguese, and sort of like marrying the theory and the practice a little bit. And that was all cool. But then at the end of the day, the clock was ticking on my money, right? It came clear to me that in September of one year, I wouldn't have a job by the August. And I was starting a family, and it's like, oh, fuck, what am I going to do? Right? Because I need income. I need to support my family. And so I took a big, big dive, a big leap of faith, and I saw that there was a research associate position happening in Glasgow, of all places. And if you come from Scotland, then a lot of people gravitate to one of the big cities, so Aberdeen, Dundee, Glasgow, Edinburgh, especially if you come from the part of Scotland I come from, which is the very far north. And I never liked Glasgow. It's quite a busy city. I prefer Edinburgh for reasons. Let's not bring up politics here, but everyone everyone has their favourites. And the research associate position was to look at hardware design language, and this was a multi-project site with then Imperial College London and Heriot-Watt University, which is on the outskirts of Edinburgh, and Glasgow, to say, look, hardware, if you design hardware these days, then you want to bring in pre-designed bits of hardware called IP cores, which just get the binary blobs. Sounds a bit familiar. And then you want to integrate it into your current system, and you have to have the assurances from the manufacturers that it does what it says it does. And the standards of how hardware communicates is written down, it's actually standardized, it's written down in PDF, but the interfaces are written in an XML language called IPExact. But there, we have to say, right, you've bought in your binary blob, how do you know it communicates, it does the communication it's supposed to do? Session types. And so there's three of us, there's three sites in the project, Glasgow, and my role was looking at, well, we sort of leaned into it. I was new to hardware, but I selected type systems, and I've been principally on that project looking at how to build orchestration language and build more fancier types for hardware description languages. Heriot-Watt was looking at other aspects which escape me at the moment. I do apologize for that. And Imperial, well, that was Nobuko Yoshida. And Nobuko Yoshida is the expert on session types. I think she is, because she is one of the original instigators of the whole typing discipline. As we were working with her, and that's how I was looking at the session types. And this was a 5-year project. It's still currently running, even though this was about 7 years ago. No, 6 years ago. Yes, 6. Uh, it was a long time. It's long time running, and that started my uh, interest in using fancy types or dependent types and anything else you would like to call it to start reasoning better about hardware. Now, I'm not the only researcher interested in this, and after I've told you my story, we can delve into it because there's lots of really cool people who know a lot more about hardware than I do, who are doing much more cool things than I do about hardware. And ostensibly, what I've been doing with hardware is looking at can we build better types that describe hardware interfaces with respect to their XML interface description. And I had an ECOOT paper in 2019 about that. But also, what I've been gearing into is being interested in this notion of quantitative typing. Now, quantitative typing is basically part of this notion of this linear typing, that if you have your type system, so types at the moment, when you think about them, are structural. They just describe you the computation and how things reduce. But what they don't reason about is substructural properties. And we've seen this with session types, and that they reason beyond the structure of your computation, but reasoning about the communication. But there's another facet there, is how many times do you use a variable? Okay. And in linear types, you have to use variables exactly once. Affine type systems, it's at most once, and there's a really cool set of work from University of Kent with Dominic Orchard on the granule system, which is you have graded modalities, which is basically you can use it n times, okay? But the whole idea of quantitative typing, and it's great for dependent types as well, is that you can reason about not just how many times something was used, which is restricted at the moment in Idris 2, at least to you can use things exactly once or many times, but also when it appears in the compilation pipeline. So if things are zero annotated, then they get erased at runtime, but they appear at compile time. And this is from Bob Atke, is the rules that are implemented in Idris 2, but harks a bit further back to that to Conor McBride. Both Conor and Bob are at Strathclyde on doing a bit more principled reasoning about not just how many times something is used, but when it's used. And what I've done and what I've had published, let's be clear on that, what I've published is not everything I've done. I've done a lot more than what I've published. And what I've done in this space is I've got a linear orchestration language that allows you to replicate what you might see in tools like Vivado, a well-known tool for designing hardware systems. And just replicating that box diagram you might see. If you're ever seen a hardware diagram, basically it's box connected with wires. Looks like circuits, but a lot more meaty. And I've got that. That's not been published yet because people don't seem to like it for one reason or another, and that you get good and bad reviews, which happens. But the other work that I've got, that I'm actually going to Seattle to the European Conference of Programming in Pacific Northwest of all places, is for how we tell me about it, is how we can get how we can use this notion of quantitative typing of essentially the linearity into netlists, which are like basically designing circuits, and sort of being very practical about it and saying, look, you're going to write up your netlist, your circuit diagram in System Verilog, and we're going to retrofit that type system with a fancier type system that does tracking, fine-grained tracking of how and when wires are used, so that you can, so you're making the implicit design decisions. So if you split a wire, and that would be in hardware design languages when you sort of repeat a variable, you can say, look, you can't do that. You need to explicitly split it. Or if you combine two inputs, you say, you can't do that unless you explicitly do that. And the idea being that if you're doing this check, you can sort of say, look, have you accidentally done fan? And the key motivating example for this, is to say, look, you might have a module that have two inputs A and B and a single output C. And right, if you say simply mapping it to a NAND gate or any sort of gate, right, you accidentally, or is it accidental to say, look, you take the A input Y and you plug it into both ends of your NAND gate and you plug the output to the C, and you've got a dangling B input. Is that what you want? Or did you, and so because a NAND gate, where the input goes to both inputs, where the input goes to both in, is simply a NOT gate, right? Is a valid construct. But if you have that dangling B, it's like, well, is that supposed to be there? Is the typo that you've you didn't connect it, or that the fact that you mentioned it, you can't tell. But in the quantitative typing world, you can say, you can flag an error saying, oh, you used A twice, you didn't explicitly split it. What about this B? It's unused. And sort of like highlights what we can sort of do already with tools like Verilator. But we've got a type system now that does it. And Verilator is an extensive static analysis tool, which is great. It's nice, but it's external static analysis. But what we've done is we've taken that asset of the quantities to say, look, do it in the type system. So now it becomes part of your modeling tools. It's not an external check, it's an internal check, which is great, which is nice. But the key thing about this is all of this, what we've talked about, is being underpinned by modeling these type systems and languages in Idris using dependent types to reason about the correctness of these constructions, these languages I'm making, because my mantra is dependent types keep you honest. And we've seen this with the other project that I'm working on at Glasgow, which is called App Control. And it's looking at leveraging Cherry operating system or Cherry capabilities. Now, for those who aren't aware with capabilities, Cherry are hardware-enabled capabilities. So in your architecture, you can provide capabilities. and it's hardware enforced. And capabilities are saying protecting regions of memory. There's a lot more to it than what I can explain, because that's not necessarily where my interest is on the project. My interest on the project is saying, look, as we're promoting these cherry capabilities further up the hardware software stack, so going from hardware into software, at the moment they're exposed as a C library, but if you want to go higher up into, say, a language like Rust, okay, what will your type system look like? How can you extend Rust to support capabilities, knowing that you don't accidentally introduce some error or some type inconsistency? Because you could always hack on the compiler and do what the fuck you want, right? But how do you know that your hacking, you're playing around, is correct? So if you have a formal model of your language and you start extending that with the new construct you want to look at, then the formal verification will tell you, is that an allowed extension or not? Now, I'm not modeling Rust. So at the moment, what I have in dependently typed languages, I have a model of a featherweight, lightweight, depending on which bantamweight, uh, language, which is imperative. Okay, and one of the things that dependent types is good at is allowing you to have these well-typed, intrinsically well-typed or intrinsically typed language descriptions. So you're modeling, say, the simply typed lambda calculus, an imperative language, and so on. The idiom is known as a well-typed interpreter, but you're building up this model of your language with the types, and then using dependent types to reason about the type safety of it in terms of doing proof, preservation, and progress. What you can do in software foundations, you can do in independently typed languages. So there's the PILFA book, Programming Language Foundations in AGDA, which is by Phil Wadler and Van Kokke, and now Jeremy Seek at Edinburgh. Jeremy's not at Edinburgh, he's at Utah, I think. On doing providing you how can you do what you can do in software foundations but in AGDA. But I've done it in Idris. Okay, and we're building up these formal models of your language, using doing a proof sum of progress and preservation, which is our as data types, and we can talk about that more later. But using that same idea of doing that proof, but then reusing that proof automatically by the way dependent types work to create a runtime for your program. And so that your proof of progress and preservation, which is classic reduction semantics, small step reduction semantics of how things compute, you do that. Okay? And so what I've done in the app control project at the moment, and this is what I'm currently writing up, so it's in the forefront of my head, is, well, look, we've modeled an imperative language. I've used work from the Delft programming language group. There's a nice guy called Arjen Rovuts, whose PhD thesis is really, really nice to read. And he's done used a technique called definitional interpreters, which is basically an interpreter, but using the well-typed aspect of dependent types to make sure things run properly. And so we have that with the imperative language, right? And now I've got this model of my language. I've written as a embedded DSL, or well-typed interpreter. But now what we've done is we've added, right, a parser, a type checker. So now that my programming language that I write is not a eDSL in Idris, it is a standalone DSL that looks a bit like Rust, doesn't have the same borrowing checking, or it doesn't have any borrow checking, but it looks like an imperative language, but has got a formally verified compiler and type checker, which is great because now I know my type system is correct for this language, and I can now start extending it. And one of the simplest extensions we've done is multi-party session types. And by doing so, dependent types keep you honest. They can keep track of, you do these extensions. Well, what does that mean? What sort of context you need? Is it just typing anything else? And dependent types help you do that. So now what we're doing is we've got the language, we've got the multi-party session types. We're now cataloging what changes we made, so that if we want to look at, say, making session types native in a language like Rust, so instead of going for the EDSL approach, the code generation approach of tools that Nabucco, Yoshida and her group do, or other people, we say, look, this is what you need to do to literally extend the compiler. Doesn't mean what they're doing is wrong. Doesn't mean what we're doing is the absolute truth. There's no one way to do these things. But it's telling a story of using dependent types and using the formal verification to work out what would you need to do if you wanted to do it like that. That's currently what I'm working on, but it's not the end of the story, because I've talked about my role as a research associate, and I'm very pleased that in 58 days, I looked in it today before we started, I'm starting the University of Strathclyde as a lecturer in cybersecurity, because a lot of the stuff I do is not necessarily, I do extend the theory for domain-specific languages for hardware, but a lot of the stuff is applied in the area of cybersecurity. And I've been really fortunate that I've been selected by University of Strathclyde to work with them as a lecturer after 6 years, more or less, as a research associate, and after 4 years as a PhD student, and to use the American terms, a student and then candidate. We don't have that distinction here in the UK, per se. That I can carry on with my research and saying, do what I would like to. And I'm not saying what I'm doing now is not what I want to do, but I can now sort of say, step back and say, look, what is it, what I've been doing over the last 6 years? Where do I want to go? What do I want to do? And I'm moving from being a researcher to a research leader. And that's quite a challenge. And sort of highlight the difference between, say, the American system and, say, the UK European system is that, once I've done my PhD, your PhD is for 3.5 years, 4 years even. And then you have to look for your research associate jobs, your postdocing. And for some, it might take many, many postdocs to become a lecturer, because lecturer positions, right, we don't have the concept of tenure in the UK, but once you've got a job, unless you really fuck up, it's permanent. But in America, you have to go through this tenure process for 5 years or so on, and you may not even get a permanent job after that. At the time of this recording, there is a very sad case in America. I don't want to highlight too much of, somebody being denied tenure, and it looks like there's a lot of politics behind it of why they were denied
Yeah.
tenure, and yet they
She's
were
from my
very.
university. I don't know if you know that.
No, I did not
Yeah.
know that. I was
Yeah.
trying to be a bit more purposely vague on this, and it's a.
Yeah, it's okay. I've been talking to her in private. I hope she would take my invitation for coming here and telling her story, because, as you mentioned, this is big, and in a way shows
It's
how.
shit, right? Let's be frank about that. You work away for five.
Yeah.
You work away for five
Yeah.
years for your tenure case, promotion case, and somebody just goes along and says, "No,
Nope. Nope.
no."
No, and what's even more frustrating, yeah, sorry if I'm just dumping some frustration here. Like, what is
Well,
even
that's
more
what we're here
frustrating is
for.
because is that, like, think about it. The academia, we're already giving, like, putting a lot of our lives, not only during tenure, like the PhD here in the US, it don't usually takes 4 years, it takes 6, sometimes 7 or 8, because there's a lot to do. There are publications that they expect us to do, so
So
you're, you're
yeah.
already
So
like a
yeah,
big part of your life already devoted to academia, and then you take this 5 years that you're already there, and then you're denied to be there. Like, it's a
yeah,
big
and
hit.
so
It's
and there's
weird.
also those differences as well. And so right, so when I did my PhD, and it's more or less the case of you do not have to be published to get your PhD. Right, you have to have
Right.
papers of publishable quality to show that. Sorry, so that you can do research, but they don't necessarily have to be published. It's great if they're published, right? Because then you say, when you write your thesis, then you say, right, these chapters were peer reviewed in these top. Well, let's be honest here, they were peer reviewed by the community that's saying it's good science. So your examiners will say, okay, and they'd have very little to argue against, because then they're going against their community. And but still, it's that notion of, so yeah. And so this, to highlight that to listeners who don't realize this, so in the UK you get 3.5 years of funding to do your PhD. So we go through the PhD process a lot quicker, but then we have a longer research associate or postdocing period.
Right.
And a lot of
Right.
people equate uh, a lot of people outside, like if I say, well, at least me, myself, right? So, and I'm the most important person in this podcast, so I'm right, is that, in America, your PhD is actually, say, a UK PhD plus a postdoc, right? So
Yep.
when you become the PhD
Yeah. Yeah.
candidate, it's basically it's that sort of time frame. In other places like, say, the Netherlands and on the continent in Europe, then the PhD position is a 5-year process where 1 year worth of your time over 5 years is more or less teaching, right? So you get paid for that, but you get 5 years, and there will be. I think any program that says you have to have published in top venues to be able to, and this is a personal opinion, any program that says you have to have published before you can get your PhD is wrong, because the publication system is just so potluck that you can have people who do great research that just can't get published because of one thing or another,
Yep.
like due to unprofessional reviews. But you should have papers of publishable quality to show that you can do that jump, because every academic knows review process is potluck.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and again, and tenure case shouldn't be potluck. You should dot all the I's, cross all the T's. You should do everything. And if you fail the tenure process, it shouldn't be a reflection on you. It's a reflection on your institution for not getting you across the line. And in the case that we've talked about, there's more to hand there, because that person has certainly dotted all the I's, crossed all the T's, and
Yeah.
done more than enough.
Now
Yeah,
this thing about the publication, sometimes I feel
yeah,
there is a little bit more of politics going on. Like both departmental politics. I wanna make sure, because I feel that something that is very different between the U.S. and Europe in general is that professors here in the U.S. they have a lot in their labs to bring money to the university. They must be getting good grants and things like that,
right.
and
So to
and that
provide a clarification there. So when I think of a professor, I think of a full professor. Okay, because this is a terminology difference, right? So in the
right.
UK, I'm not starting as an associate professor or assistant professor. I'm starting as a lecturer, going to a senior lecturer, going to a reader, and then if I want to sort of give up on life, become a professor. Uh, uh, but
We
no, but
already gave up on life when we started in academia. No.
indeed. No, but so there's a sort of a different, and so also it's a cultural difference, right? So, and I'm not saying you're wrong here, just to so let everyone, you know, there are different academic cultures across the world.
Right.
So even in Latin America, New Zealand, Oceania, Asia, Africa, right? And there are different models of doing things. And what you see more in the US is all the universities are a bit further apart than people would like. Okay.
Hmm.
And so you can't easily commute to 6 of the best PL universities in the world,
True.
right? But also, as more or less expected, is once you've done your PhD, you're going to go on to the job market
Yeah.
to become an associate professor.
Hmm.
In the UK, you don't have that. There's no annual um, procession of newly minted PhDs saying, I need a job so I can build my research group, right? In the UK, it's basically you could finish or have your Viva in middle of winter. Mine was in February, right? Or you could have it in November. Any time throughout the year, you don't get the knock on the head with a cap until the summer. But then after that, what do you do for a job? There's no job. Getting a lectureship in the UK, at least, also in the continent, it's it's hellish. It's not enough jobs for not enough people. And to make things aware, and I'm not saying it's all bad, because we should ideally look at industry for a lot of interesting research opportunities. But at the moment in UK academia, we are striking. We have a union, the Universities and College Union, because don't be afraid of unions. A sign of a healthy society is that unions are loved and hated equally, but they're there. Uh, because we're striking about paying conditions, because pay shit. Pay's not getting better. Our pensions are being not destroyed, but it's all precarious. There's lots of issues there. But we're striking. But also, jobs are not always there. You get one job advert, and half the world applies for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in America, there's a bit more. There are lots of jobs that people can do, and that's interesting in terms of if you want to look at the routes going up from, saying, a PhD student candidate to the academic career ladder. There's different routes to it, and there's advantages and disadvantages, right? But we're here to talk about PL and type theory, and I think maybe we should move on from that. Not because it's just we could talk about that for the entire podcast, and I think
It's true.
it's true, and there's some really shit situations happening, but I think let's sort of move on, because we can always come back to talking about the academic thing, because I'm a parent in academia, and it's good and bad, right? There's lots of good things, and there's lots of things to talk about being in academia, but
Yeah.
you've got me to talk about PL and type theory, and let's switch focus to that.
Yes, for sure,
Yeah.
for sure. Well, the thing about PL in academia, that I don't know, I feel that these are themes that are starting to get recurrent in this podcast, and the reason for that is that it is very important for all of us that are here, right? These are problems that affect us very directly, and these are problems that, in one way or another, directly or indirectly, we have to work with them, through them, and against them, right? And in particular, like you mentioned about burnout doing your masters, if I'm not mistaken, and
Undergraduate
undergraduate, that's
and
even
masters
right.
and
Yeah, so
PhD.
I personally also just came back from a little sabbatical, if you can call it that, because I don't think PhD students do sabbaticals, but I took a pretty much like a year off to, like, take my mind away from all of this and refocus on what are my interests and what I'm getting at. And one thing that I realized, in one way or another, is that there are very big problems in academia. There are big problems in PL academia, and these are things that I believe that my generation of academics will have to face, and these are your generation as well, because you're just starting this. So this is why I feel these are the kind of things that are getting recurrent here, and will keep being recurrent, I hope, because these are things that we definitely have to talk more and to address more. But well, we can come back to. I think there are some very interesting things that we can touch about that later.
No,
But
no, absolutely, yeah,
well, so to make things a little more constructive in a way, how about we talk? I feel that you have quite some views in two things that I wanna touch. I'll leave it to you. What can we go through first? The first one is, like, seems to me that you have some thoughts on how to best teach PL, things along those lines. And the second thing is, um, about the reviewing process, right?
cool. Yeah, these are topics dear to my heart, right? So we have to. It's not just about teaching PL; it's about self-study. So a lot of the stuff that I've learned in programming language theory and type theory is more or less self-study. Right? Didn't do any graduate courses. I've not been to any summer schools in PL. Everything I've learned is from reading TAPL, and just the audience can't see this, but they'll hear this, which is this is what's on my book on my
He
desk, which
has
is
he has his
TAPL.
Bible. He has his Bible
I
in his hand. Tapo.
Yeah, I have TAPL, and you'll hear the thud in a minute of it being slammed down on my desk. Uh, and so, I've been reading about that, and it's like, how can you, and if you want to teach things, you also want to look about how can you make programming language theory, programming language practice, principles, paradigms accessible. We have to remember that the PL is a really broad field, and you can't really master all. You're either a master of, what's this phrase? You're a master of, sorry, there's a really nice phrase in English to say, like, something of something, master of none, right?
Yeah,
And you can't really be an expert in everything. You have to really find your niche and field. And I think along those lines, and a lot of the theory you want to go teach in practice gets lost because some of the presentation can be quite assuming,
yeah,
and that can be quite confusing. To do a case in point, as you asked me offline, what my thoughts and how best to teach PL, and this links into how do you make it accessible, and there was a really, really nice inaugural lecture for Felinne Hermans, who's now a professor at the University Amsterdam. I think it's the Free University. We can correct it in the show notes, but she is a programming language person, but she doesn't look at theory. She looks more at accessibility, right? Principally, and sadly, well, not sadly for me because I could understand it, the inaugural lecture was in Dutch, right? So if you do find it, I don't know if there are translations for it, but it's great. And one of the things she picked up on, and I really love her work in this area, in that she wants to try and tackle what is called epistemic injustice, right? Which is, when we are designing something, we have lots of preconceived notions in our head, preconceived abilities of what people can do, can read, how they write, terminology and all that. And if you are in the know of these things, or they are natural to you, then it makes your life a lot easier. And if you're not, it makes it harder. And one of the cases in points is every single programming language that we teach mostly uses English for keywords. And if English is not your first language, do you know what print means? Do you know what for means? Do you know the semantics of what for loop does? Do you know what printing will do? Even the numbers we use, the values, constants like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, those are, well, actually they're Arabic numbers, but we use them in English, right? Because they're, but they're not what Arabic use for numbers now. But anyway, that's a preconceived notion, right? And so if you want to teach, and so Felinne Hermans, her background is, she did her PhD, I think it was at Delft, worked at Leiden for a while. Well, for a long time, she has taught high schoolers programming, right? How to do programming. And one of the things she got from this was the epistemic injustice of that. If you want to study programming, and this applies to theory as well, because there's some nice links there, is that there's lots of preconceived notions in how you design your language. Okay, we've talked. I've mentioned things like printing for, right? Even it's English keywords, right? I don't know Spanish, but wouldn't it be nice if you want to program in Python that you could use the Spanish terms, the Spanish keywords, right? Or Portuguese, because I see it's a Brazilian flag in the background. Or if you know Portuguese, do you want to do wouldn't that be better for those who are new to programming to have that mental model of not having to learn English first, that they could use their native language? And so one of the nice things about Felinne Hermans is she's got this heady language, which I presume is named after Hedy Lamarr, one of the famous electrical engineers from the 40s, who's also an actress. Really bit of history there. She sort of see why she's famous. She designed a part of the guidance system for either missiles or submarines during the 1940s. It was
Wow.
really amazing. Yeah,
Wow.
if you look her up, Hedy. Also a famous actress. So if you're into Mel Brooks, if you ever watch Blazing Saddles, one of the main characters is called Hedley Lamar, and one of the recurring motifs is that everyone calls him Hedy. And he corrects it. Anyway, I digress. Well, anyway, so she got this language Hedy, and the whole idea is it is a gradual syntax, not typed, language. And to help combat the epistemic injustice is that you say, right, you go through many stages of grief. I call it grief, but it's not, it's actually learning. You start off in a language that looks almost like natural language. There's no structure. Well, there's minimal structure. It looks more like natural language programming, because a lot of the preconceived notions of how to program, say, in Python, in Rust, in Java, is a semicolon means something. Quotation marks mean something. System to out to print line means something. Types mean something. And if the student doesn't have the preconceived knowledge, when they get presented with a compiler error, it's written for people who are aware of what the language is.
Mm-hmm.
And what she's done with her wonderful team, and she's taken a language called Hedi, and she starts off on level 1, which is very unstructured, more natural language. It's been translated into many languages. I don't know off heart how many languages, but it's it's like even like non-ASCII languages like Thai, languages from India, languages from Pakistan, Chinese, right?
Mm-hmm.
And students get exposed to that and they learn how to program in this language. And once they've mastered that, I'm doing that in inverted quotes, as they can then move on to the next level, which adds in a little bit more rigor. And so on and so forth. And so what she's done with this Hedi language is she's got this gradual notion of learning, of going from something that you're familiar with to something you're not familiar with, and at the end result, it just happens to be Python, or close enough to Python. That is, when they make the jump to going up to Python, it's no longer new. And why does it matter for PL? Well, one of the things I really hated about teaching as an undergraduate, as a PhD candidate doing demonstration, is you have to get students to understand error messages when they write in any language, be it Java, Smalltalk, Scheme, Haskell, whatever. They have to learn not only they have to learn programming language concepts for the language they're working in, right? And they
Mm-hmm.
might not be, and if they're new, they might not be familiar with it. And then they say, right, you can program in Haskell, ergo you now know the simply type band calculus or system F. No, you don't. You know Haskell and how it's presented it. You know OCaml. Well, you don't know system F, even though it is system F, or system F omega, let's be precise. But you don't know it because you haven't done that translation of your concrete syntax down to the abstract syntax, which just happens to be it. And one of the ways I think it's a nice way to make things accessible is to take this gradual approach of saying, look, and this is one thing I want to do as part of my teaching, but more to do with security concepts, but also with programming languages, because it's a really cool concept of saying, look, can we start someone and say a lightweight version of, say, Haskell or OCaml, and gradually take them to System F Omega or System F, right? So that they then get a better appreciation of how your languages work, make it a bit more accessible. But there's more to that, right? So a lot more. I can say a few more things about this. So one of the things I would like to talk about is like the tooling, right? So, right, let's say now you've, or even going from System F all the way up to Haskell, there and back again, a Hobbit story. Now, but part of it is, we're talking about PL, so let's talk about learning a language, right? I talked about being in teaching first year's Java, right? I've also taught second years, this was at St. Andrews, Haskell and Python, okay? Now, error messages, as we know from talking about the Felinne Hermans work, can be hairy. You need to know things to understand them. And I don't know if you have looked at the type for fold R or traverse recently in Haskell.
Yeah, they can be a little confusing for first-time
Right,
users. Yeah.
right, exactly. It's confusing for first-time users. And there's projects. So in Utrecht, there was I think it's Hugs, and they look at more about generating more useful error messages. Okay, that's cool. It's interesting work. I've got nothing against this work because a lot of work is all interesting for a reason. The people do it there, and I go, well, look, right. Why are we using and trying to make sense of industrial strength tools for teaching and research? Or like
Mm,
industrial research strength tools to teach programming concepts or programming languages, right?
right.
It's because the reason we do that is knowledge transfer. So we teach students, say, Java in some of the universities I've gone to in the first year because when they change degree or they switch out degree to do something else, because you have a multi uh, subject intake where they all have their majors and minors and they can switch degrees. Well, they've got transferable skill. They know JavaScript, they know Java, they can go off the industry and do interesting things. They know the language. That's fine. But is it? But it's not. 100% great, because then they're learning a language. So I remember in my first year at St Andrews being told, somebody says, can we use Dreamweaver to build the websites? And this was for an IT course. And for those of you who are old enough to remember Dreamweaver, it was a integrated development environment for websites. Right? It shows my age a little bit. And the head of school at the time basically says, well, when I was young, we learned Algo or S-Algo or Algo 68, blah, blah, blah. This, long time ago, but nobody uses it anymore. They all use Java, right? Times change, tooling changes, languages change. And so it's better to teach principles and paradigms than to move on. So, but getting to my point, so I'm digressing, in which is, right, when I was younger, my father gave me a kid's carpentry toolbox. So if you're in carpentry, then you have saws, you have files, you have hammers, nails, whatever. But this wasn't like a plastic toy. This was a proper toolkit, but aimed for something like a kid could use, like a 6, 7-year-old kid. So he didn't give me access to a plane or all the big saws and all that stuff, right? He gave me tooling that was suitable for my age, for my knowledge, to play around with, to be able to use. Because if you think about a saw can be, 50 centimeters in length or something like that. It's a large thing. And imagine a 7-year-old kid trying to use that saw, but then to use a smaller saw designed for them is better, right? So if we're going to start, and this is all about teaching PL, right? We'll go into theory a bit more. And that, well, why don't we try and give people a more conducive environment to learn about programming, or maybe to learn the language in an environment that's better for them? And that is a quite interesting concept, okay? Because at the moment we're giving people industrial research strength tools, right? Now people think, well, we've got all this great infrastructure. Why should we change it and move people on? And I go, well, we shouldn't, because there's lots of great work coming out now on developer experience. So, everyone uses VS Code now. Even Coq people use VS Code, and that's a big statement.
Yep.
Agda and Idris people, people are migrating to this, right? And maybe what we should be looking at is not creating new languages for people to learn, say, functional programming, or to learn, say, object-oriented programming. But let's look at the existing design space. And one of the things I really want to explore and work with some, say, computer science education people, is saying, right, on what the impact of this would be is, and it's a bit of anticlimactic, is let's get rid of the prelude and replace it with something that is more easier for teaching. So everyone can, because GCH error messages are quite cool and can be quite precise if the library they're working with is as precise. Okay? And so this is one thing, the type for fold R and traverse are hairy because they're designed for industrial strength programming. So why not replace it with a prelude where traverse just works on lists, and they're going to use it for a semester, but then they get what traverse is. They don't get any, there's no, and I don't want to use the phrase epistemic injustice to describe this, but there's no preconceived notion. They don't have to learn new things, and you as an educator can then introduce these new things to them. And it's a very simple change. You don't need to do anything crazy, as in design a new language. Haskell's Haskell 98 is a great language. Let's not talk about the rest of Haskell, but it's great. There's great error messages. The compiler's nice. So but let's change the environment people are working in.
Yeah.
That's right. We're talking about accessibility of PL. I realize I've got notes on my screen for people who, just to be clear and transparent about these things, which are trying to remind me of what I want to talk about. And the other bit I want to talk about accessibility is something that I think might be quite decisive in some way. And so this is quite a long-term interest of me from the days when I started using Idris and seeing Agda being used and seeing Coq being used. I've not actually used Coq at all, but I've read Software Foundation, so I get familiar with the syntax there. And to help motivate this, so I'm going to mention another podcast here, the Threads and Signals podcast. It's really nice.
Which is great, from the Jane Street people.
Yes, indeed. And they had Richard Eisenberg on it. recently, and he's said lots of good things. He even prompted me to try and write a good definition of what dependent types are, which I haven't said, but because everyone has to have that one. And he mentions there that, code is read a lot more than it's written. Right? Has to be accessible. So maybe we should look at presenting our formalisms and our code in a way that's nicer to read. But mathematicians don't do that. Andre Bauer, a lot of people might know him. I think he's at the University of
Ljubljana.
Is Ljubljana. Okay, yeah. So it's in the Balkans. So it's either Slovenia, I think. Anyway, we can correct that in the show notes because remember, he had a really nice talk in February this year at the Mechanized Proof Assistant Workshop in San Francisco entitled Formalizing Invisible Mathematics. And this is to do with accessibility as well. And he mentions, and I like this, and I agree with this, mechanization helps make the invisible visible. So that if you mechanize your programs, don't go for efficiency, go for correctness. Mechanization forces you to be honest. Dependent types make you honest. You cannot hide details. You can't say blah, 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 see this paper, or blah, 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 we assume this, right? Or this is widely known. If you're mechanizing, you have to write all the blah, blah, blahs down for it to work, which is what, with my work in this language for app control, is why we mechanize it, is to make it that. And the whole point there is just saying, look, by doing that, we're providing complete proofs. We're making it more accessible, right? And that you don't, if you want to learn about something, you have a history of where to go in that proof of how everything's defined. And that's great because you're now saying you don't need to second guess, because assumed knowledge, that's epistemic injustice. One of the things that I hate is nobody's explained to me when I look at some PL papers of why they sometimes have, what's the history? And we need more historians in PL to keep track of where our society is going. Of you have a box with your judgment in that says, look, under this context, E is type T to describe languages. Nobody's explained to me where it is. It just happens to appear in every paper, and I can't find a paper that says this is why it's called that. It's assumed knowledge
It is.
unless
Yeah.
you know the right person who tells you to do that or
Yeah.
explains to you about it. And if you
Mhm.
don't,
Yeah,
and that's important.
it is.
And but the thing is, it's and that's the thing, you want to make things more accessible in that way. So this is part of the mechanism. And I say, do look at Andre Bauer's talks. It's quite nice for that. But we can go deeper, right? Presentation, right? I can read TAPL, but I find it harder to read PILFA, which is the AGDA version of Software Foundations, because there's a lot of mixfix and Unicode and AGDA notation that is really, really hard to understand unless you have an interactive experience, like a browser, or you're doing it in the editor. For me, I find mixfix and some Unicode notations really hard to read. Other people don't. Great. I do. Lean 4, and there's a talk at Edinburgh a few weeks ago with one of the engineers on Lean 4 talking about how they've got this new system to allow mathematicians to write down their notations as they would in their paper, but in Lean 4, which to me is the complete opposite, not complete opposite, it's sort of is it's formalizing the mathematics, but it's sort of linked to Andre Bauer's notion of, by doing the mechanization, it makes things a bit clearer, right? You can sort of have this history and this trace of what the theorems are, what they do. But by using the notation and the Unicode, it can make things a bit harder. And another case in point, there's a wonderful paper, or technically wonderful, let's be honest, of the System F for Fun and Profit. System F in AGDA for Fun and Profit, which was by James Chapman, Chase, oh God, I've forgotten his name. James Chapman, Phil Wadler, I think then, and then Coca, of the mechanized System F in AGDA, right? And I read the paper and I was translating it to Idris. I've attempted it many times over the last couple of years. Finally got around to doing it last week, complete reproduction. And I was like, what does this symbol mean? And there was a U symbol, sum, with a plus in it in the code. I was reading the paper, so I didn't have it in an editor. I didn't have the original source on hand. I was reading the paper. I couldn't work out what that meant because there was no definition in the paper because it was invisible. Assumed. Turns out it was just either in Agda, right? Just. But the point of it is, Unicode and Mixfix, right, can be nice to use, but they can be incredibly hard to read if you're not used to it or if you don't have an interactive environment. And so even though I like some of the PILFA Programming Language Foundation Agda treatment of how they do reasoning about programming language foundations in a dependently typed language, it's really hard to read. I have an easier time reading Software Foundations from what I do remember of it, because it's all ASCII. Because it's more readable. Because I don't have to look up what notation is. The Mixfix, I don't have to look, and I've got glasses on. I've got poor eyesight. I don't have to say, is that a speck of dust on my monitor, or is that the Agda dot operator, or is it a backtick for the variable, or is it dust? Right?
It's true. Yeah, that happened to me.
and that is annoying. And so, and I go back to I think was it Robert Harper. He has the other textbook that you need to read about programming language foundation semantics, and he has this wonderful quote. Everything's wonderful, right? He has this really nice informative quote. Concrete syntax is what we write as a user. It's ambiguous. You need shunting algorithms. You need parentheses to clarify things. Okay? Concrete syntax, and that's the point of it, is to let people do a lot of things that you don't want them to. Like, it gives you freedom. But when you reason about things, you don't want to have this ambiguity crop up when you're writing your proofs of progress or preservation. So we turn to abstract syntax. It's unambiguous, right? Because everything's clearly designed. Precedence isn't an issue because it's built in. You don't have infix operators. You might want to use prefix operators or S expressions, right? And I want to talk about accessibility is, why are we still presenting mechanizations in inaccessible presentations, right? And that's what I said. Agda is really nice in using dependent types, but I personally find the Mixfix and the Unicode notation too much. The lot of time I spent trying to make things unambiguous shouldn't be there. It should be clear, right? And this is why I like doing things in a Now, bearing in mind, I want to be very clear here that the use of Unicode and Mixfix is a developer choice, not a language choice. If you wanted to do PILFA in ASCII, great, you can do that. But then you have to, and if you want to do ASCII and all prefix, basically S expressions all the way down, you can do that, but you have to make sure everything else is like that. But that's a developer choice, not a language choice. Okay, and in Idris 2, or Idris and Idris 2, then it's not a language. Some of it is a language choice because it is actually restricted where you can use Unicode, and it's just on names, and you can't really do Mixfix. You can only have binary operators and precedency or associativity levels. And to me, that makes doing things in like my way of doing things, regardless if you're doing Agda or Idris, is to make my mechanizations accessible by being easy to read. And to me, if you want to make things accessible with respect to the mechanization, do that. But then when you're writing your papers, then you have to keep that in mind. What is the invisible assumptions that you're writing? What is, and I was talking to Conor McBride many years ago, pre-pandemic, and he mentioned, when you write your typing rules, you have systematic. Right, you have basically like variables in your typing judgments, which are part of the formalism, but they're important. Make things explicit. Don't make sure everything's introduced. Don't make things thin air. If you have, say, you have your typing judgments, right? Then if you have things like labels, make a note of what you expect a label to be. What is a label in your language? If you're doing, when we talk about sum types and record types in languages, we sort of we might gloss over what a label is. Well, if you know it, then it's quite simple. But if you don't know it, then well, how does that label translate to a real language, right? Should it be, and we know that with labels, they're bindings. They can, they're bound. They're names in your language. But then, do they need to be? And yes, they do. But then, what if you don't know this trick? And maybe it's because I'm not reading the right things. But
So,
yeah.
question, like I think a big part of the issue is that many of the venues that we publish PL work, we have a number of page that we have to go through, and we're
Yes,
trying to like be a little more leave behind some things that should be considered obvious. And another thing too is that like the publications are not in a vacuum, right? We are building upon other publications, and we can kind of like assume that okay, we are inserted in this particular thing here, and things that are built there kind of is still valid now. How do you see that?
that is a very good question, right? Because when you have your papers, you're presenting a snapshot of your work at the time. And how do you make that accessible? How do you make that long-lived? And this comes up to another interest of mine, which is research artifacts, because it links into that. Because I think we should, when we submit a paper, there should be a accompanying research artifact for it. In the past, those were the appendices that gave you all the full proofs that were written by hand. Nowadays, artifacts are reproducible and they can be mechanized or be bits of code, and it's quite open to what an artifact is. And because then you can say, look, we are going to go over this bits and pieces, but the rest of the material will be in the artifact that's associated with it. Stephanie Weirich had a paper at ETAPS last year. Well, not her paper, it was her, I think, PhD student's paper. So let's credit where credit's due is to the PhD student. I've forgotten the name. It was on the dependency calculus or something along those lines. Anyway, regardless, they did a wonderful thing of saying, right, here's my theory. We're going to show you snippets of it. But we've mechanized it. And they had footnotes galore in that paper saying, see this theorem here? See this definition? It's this file. It's in this file in the coq code. And so what they've done is saying, look, we're presenting to you this formalism. There's no coq code or ACTA code. We're going back to our roots of presenting things with mathematical notation, but we're linking it to the mechanization, where we explain greater details. We're giving you everything you need. And if we have these little lemmas that we don't give proofs for, we say, well, actually, the proofs are in the mechanization. And with good research artifacts, we can do that. We can say, look, your paper, your research output is not just the paper, it's also the artifact. It can also be the artifact alongside it that says helps provide more evidence to what you're doing. Now, I was very fortunate enough to be part of the A+ 22 artifact committee as co-chair, and shout out to Arpita Dutta from the National University of Singapore, who was co-chair, who did a lot of work on it as well. And one of the things we talked about is what, artifact. And so this goes to a current trend that we're seeing more and more artifacts being associated with our submitted papers. I think that is quite healthy because it means put your money where your mouth is. And so if you have this theory, and so my ECUP paper that I'm presenting in a couple of weeks is saying it's all theoretical in the paper, but there's a section that says, oh, by the way, I did it in idris 2, I've got mechanization. The artifact is the mechanization, that is the supporting evidence. And the artifact evaluation committee provides a set of eyes who can look at the mechanization and saying, actually, is what they did, does it correspond to what they said in the paper? Okay. But we have to remember that artifacts, and some people disagree with this, some people see artifacts as code reuse, as software. They have the software developer mindset. So, right, if I want to build off this work that we mentioned that was by Stephanie Anner Shouldn't, then some people says, right, I should be able to go to the GitHub, to the Git repo, clone it, and work with it. And I go, that's fair enough. But what if it's 10 years down the line? What if it's 20 years down the line? What if it's 30 years down the line? And you download that same repository and the same code base, and it hasn't been worked on for 20, 30 years, or however long, is it still guaranteed to work? Okay, is it? It's not, right? You can say, well, what about using Docker? And go, well, what if Docker's not around? What if a dependency you rely on is no longer available, and you have to bring in outside dependencies? You're not providing a self-contained thing, okay? Now, my thoughts as somebody running an artifact evaluation committee was, right, I remember to when I was watching Indiana Jones, when I was a young boy, right? And there's that scene on the ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, or was it the Pacific Ocean? I don't remember what. And the character Indiana Jones has this crucifix from a conquistador, and there was somebody stealing it, and he goes, "It belongs in a museum," right? If you're familiar with the scene, readers, it's quite a iconic scene. But for me, the most iconic thing was, it belongs in a museum. And the point was, you don't hoard knowledge, you make it accessible. And the reason I wanted to stress that is because museums display artifacts. There are people in the museum, librarians, curators, whose job it is to curate the artifact to make it accessible to people down the line, right? Science will tell you how to clone a T-Rex from amber. Philosophers and artists will say that's a bad idea. But what they can also say is, well, if you're going to do it, you want to preserve it prosperity, let's talk about curation. And they say, and this is the cool thing, is right, so if our artifacts are in a museum or a library, what we can now say is, right, if it's in a well-curated format, 30 years down the line, somebody can come along and say, look, I want to use this piece of code from 30 years ago, and I want it to run. And the librarian goes, right, here's the setup that allows you to do that, right? We as scientists should be amenable to that, saying, look, we will, for prosperity, we will preserve our snapshots of our research that we present at conferences in a way that makes it reproducible, not tomorrow, but 30 years down the line for people who are interested in it. But what we should also do is make it accessible for those who are interested in it now. And this is where the tension I see coming in with artifacts is that it's a lot of work to build artifacts, right? It is a lot of work to build it, and also to decide what sort of artifact do you want to build. Right? If you've got a hardware thing, or you're talking about performance, what does that artifact look like? And I think we're still not there yet in providing good guidance on people who are not doing programming language, theoretical work, mechanization, or bits of software. For those who are, say, doing distributed systems, those doing hardware, right? You can't package that up as a software bundle that makes things easily accessible. You might need hard, and that, by hard, I mean physical machines to say, look, my research works on this specific GPU, it works on this design environment, it works on this specific hardware. We don't have guidelines for that. But what we do have maturing is, like if you want to package up, say, your mechanization or your software, how to do that in a way that is both reproducible 30 years down the line, but also accessible to those who want to extend it now. right? And I don't think all artifact committees do it the same way, which is wrong. What we really need is a council of Nicaea, of just a meeting of all people in PL who are interested in artifact evaluation to sort of go back and rethink what and re-examine what we are doing. They did it many years ago. Jan Vitek, Christopher Murphy from Brown, Jan Vitek from Northeastern. They set some guidelines, but nobody's really revisited that set of guidelines to update it for what we've known now for the last 10, 15 years.
We haven't created even the guidelines.
We do. There are. Well, the thing is, it's mismatched, right? There's artifacteval.org, which has some guidelines, but there's nothing really. But it hasn't been. That's the point. It hasn't been touched for a long time. It hasn't been refreshed with what we know now about doing artifacts. And that is something we need to change. We need to periodically revisit how we do artifacts so that we are on top of trends, we're on top of what everyone else is doing, that especially for communities who are, say, outside SIGPlan, right? And if they want to do artifacts, and I didn't realize this, in that, if you're in SIGPlan, you get access to the badges and the artwork for it. But if you want to do something else, you have to do fundamentally distinct because of copyright, right? Can we do something a bit better and more copyleft on saying making badges that are shared by communities and the guidelines for that? Can we come as a community together to do this single, not single, but just like, let's talk, right? Let's have a design by committee, whatever you want to do, but just every so often revisit how we do artifacts from what we've learned over the last 5 years or 10 years, right? Let's have our 5-year plan. Because if we don't, people won't take artifacts seriously enough, especially if they're cumbersome to use, cumbersome to package, right? And for things like mechanization and the PL work that I do, we've got it down to fine art, right? In my projects, there is a make file, because I still use make, it's wonderful, to build my Idris projects, but we have a target called make artifact, right? And you can go from having, for each per project, because of the tooling we've used and the infrastructure we've developed, that we can go from 0 to artifact in about 10 minutes, right? And that's for the virtual machine provision. There's documentation that needs happening, but a lot of it, I'll be honest, I have templates, because 90% of the time, the instructions for how to build and deploy Idris software or that is the same. Or if you want to build browsable source code, well, we've got tooling to do that. If you want to build your documentation, we have documentation generators for that. If you want to do the tutorial, that's where you can spend effort, right? But there's a whole lot of low-hanging fruit that we can automate to make building artifacts. And I don't just mean building the virtual machines. I mean getting a copy of the source code, putting it into an archive, getting all the dependencies, making things standalone. We can automate all these things to make artifacts a little bit more easier to do, but with high quality.
I really like those point of views, and I think they're very, very important. Even more because, in a way, I feel that when we are submitting papers nowadays, often enough we put it, and by we, I usually mean the PhD students are putting a lot of effort into mechanizing whatever is in the paper, right? But
Mm,
once we are writing down the paper and we are submitting, there's like the reviewers are not that so interested in the artifact that much. Like, even though these things that you're mentioning, that
yeah.
that it's really nice and very important and like really gives you this heavy insight that things that I'm saying in the paper are actually correct, and here is my code to show it, right? So I definitely understand, and I feel that if we put more a better guideline, and like have a better set of reasons on how to deal with artifacts, we can give them the proper weight they deserve and they should have in our field.
No, absolutely, I agree with you. And I don't think we're far from that. I'm quite hopeful in this. This will show off my British heritage. So there's a famous joke by, oh word, not the two Ronnies. Uh, Morecambe and Wise. They're very famous comedians from the 70s, right? And there's a very famous sketch with a famous pianist called Andre Previn, and it's about playing music. And Andre Previn got the comedic timing quite great, but the whole point is Andre Previn was playing this wonderful piano piece, and Morecambe, one of the things, was just doing blah 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 blah. And the joke was, Previn said he needs to play all the right notes, and Morecambe went, "Well, it's the right notes but the wrong order." So for people, please do look up. It's one of the classic British comedy. But the whole point there related to the artifact in that I'm not saying it's dire. I'm saying we've got all the right pieces around, but they're not in the right order. They're not. We need to sit down and think about this. How can we be better as a community to make things? We can segue on to looking about how do we form our committees for this? What can we learn about it? And how can that help us wider? Because artifact evaluation committees are a bit ahead of the times compared to the regular research paper committees on how they're formed.
Right. Before we
Yeah,
continue, how about we take a short break and go into that?
please.
All right, Zoom. All right, we are back to talk about community and reviewing and discussing research. Where do you wanna start with here? We already talked about reproducible research and artifacts.
Yep. So maybe we start on we can talk about reviewing, okay?
All right.
Because we talk about success in terms of papers, and we don't often talk about, well, some people do, right? They talk about your rejections and how shit it can make you feel when somebody's rejected your work, and you look at it and you go, well, what's happened here? Because everyone puts lots of effort in their papers, and we need to acknowledge that. Some people, you get the odd paper that it's clear that that's not what happened, but the majority, if you submit something for publication at the big venues, you put a lot of work into it. And I think it's only fair then, if that paper gets reviewed, it gets a good review. I'm not talking about a positive review, but I'm talking about it is a professional review that looks at the paper and gives a good verdict on the paper, and the decision is just and sound. Okay? But we've all been on the end of reviewer 2 that basically says, this is not a good paper, I wouldn't have done it like this. Right? And that's heartbreaking because, and they might not even explain why, and they'll just tank your paper. And I think what I want to say about this is hope is what I feel is changing, and should change, but it's still there in our communities. And I've not served on a program committee for a while. I've been quite fortunate that when I have been selected to serve, it's through essentially grace and favour, not through nomination. So in artifact evaluation committees, it's all done by nominations. That's the leading part of what they do, where they're ahead of the curve, and that you form your committee by nominations, but on standard committees you're not. And I remember being on these committees I've been on, and you basically, depending on who's the program director, sometimes you get in-depth instructions on how to review, and you'll get pointers on how to review certain types of paper. But it's inconsistent, but still there's this notion of, right, a bad review is one that somebody will look at it, and like the author will look at it, or the rebuttal process will look at it and actually not get why it's being rejected. It sounds like the reviewer is out to get someone, and that's wrong. Okay? What the review should do, and we all know this, but still people do it, or still don't do it, and what a review should do is basically critically appraise your work and tell in such a way that is, you understand why it's not being accepted. You understand why it's accepted, but you might be a little bit hurt from it, but it's not going to put you on a downward spiral. So and I want to make this clear, when I talk about a good review, I don't talk about getting A's, if that's what the conference uses. I mean, it's getting a result that makes you say, I get it. I see it. I see what's happening here. But we need to be better at that. I think we need to have more consistency in that, and have a bit more ways of having a bit more meta reviews to sort of keep reviewers on task, to remind them that you need to do a proper review. We need to be maybe a bit more transparent, and I don't know precisely how we can do that nicely and efficiently, because we're getting more and more papers submitted to conferences, and more people and less people are doing reviewing. But we need to make sure that the reviewers are able to do these good reviews in the time allotted to them. And I want to highlight, there's a really nice SIGPlan blog article from Peter Sewell on good and bad reasons to reject a paper. Actually, the title is Bad Reasons to Reject Good Papers and Vice Versa. And he enumerates these reasons of what's a bad reason to reject a paper and what's a good reason to reject a paper. And whenever I write a review or I read a review to my paper, I always bring this up to look at it and say, look, can I match what's being said here to one of these reasons? And that helps me feel better of saying, look, this was a bad review because it's a bad reason to reject the paper, right? But I shouldn't have to do that. I should be reading it and saying, actually, this is a good reason. I understand it sucks, right? It doesn't make my day well, but like, a week down the line, it's a good reason. You're given a good reason, and I urge people to, if they're doing reviewing, is to look at that blog post and read it. If you're a PC chair, is to start providing good documentation for your reviewers that could be passed around from each iteration of your conference, like the call for papers of saying, here are the guidelines. We're starting to see this now. I'm not going to say we don't do this at the moment. As I said, there are some guidelines for things experimental work that is easily accessible. But I think just to be a bit more consistent as a community of saying, look, if you want to write a review, here is how you do it in such a way that it's good, that you can understand, so that the reader can understand why it's being rejected and not just because you didn't like it or you think there's something fundamentally wrong but don't necessarily agree with it.
Something that makes me wonder if we're not trying to tackle the problem that we shouldn't have in first place, because sometimes I feel that it's very weird that computer science is one of the few sciences that uses conference as the model of publication,
Yes.
whereas when we have a journal publication, we are working with the reviewer, not against the reviewer, in the sense that we are going, like, it's not going to be he's going to give his review and it's either rejected or approved, but they will give you some guidelines. Hey, these are some things that I would like to change, and
Yeah,
let's
no,
work
so
with that.
that
Maybe.
you're right there, and I think that some of the conference models we're seeing that with the multiple rounds per year,
Yeah.
and that you will get a second choice. But I think there's a lot more to be learned here. So one concept that's quite interesting, I haven't seen played at large, is that of shepherding.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so shepherding is when a lead reviewer will then, after the decision's been made, and if it's and unless it's sorry, if the decision's been made and it's a conditional, then the shepherd will work with you to get into a shape that turns it from conditional to accepted. And that's quite interesting in terms of trying to get the paper, but still that can be quite biased on what's the shepherd, what does the shepherd think is a good way to improve the paper. And some people could argue that isn't the job of the reviewing community. And we should, and it's because you're adding in sort of bias there, and do the shepherds become, and the work of a shepherd can be quite hard, but they also be quite useful in getting works and feedback. But you could also argue, and I tend to agree with this more, even though shepherding sounds like a nice idea, in that it's not the job of the reviewer to actively make, they're a passive observer of the paper. The job is to review it and say, look, objectively, this is what we think are the weaknesses that make it unpublished, it shouldn't be published, or this is what you need to strengthen for it to become publishable. But then you get this memory loss of, right, you write for one conference, they reject it. You write to another conference, they reject it. And to a third one, they reject it. To a fourth one, they reject it. And each time it's
And we're
different
already talking
reviewers.
about 3 years in this process already.
Yeah. Yeah, 3 years in the process, and each review says, will contradict each other. And
Yeah.
and that's it. And so this is the thing. If you want to improve reviewing, then we need to improve consistency in it. And it's quite a hard thing to solve, and I don't know actively how to solve it, aside from the fact that we need to address it.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
can a PC be internally consistent? Okay, I yeah, and I've got direct experience of that. I'm not going to delve into it too much because it's still quite fresh in my mind. But I submitted 2 papers to a conference, one accepted, one rejected, very similar papers in terms of we used a solution to solve the same-ish solution to solve 2 different problems, which, and we got chastised a little bit because the committee was saying they thought it was the same problem with 2 different solutions. Sorry, I forget the details, but the whole point was that they misunderstood what we were doing. But the whole point is the reviewers, the 2 sets of reviewers for the 2 papers, had 2 completely different viewpoints on the solution, which was more or less, the same idea. One says it was fundamentally wrong, the other said it was fundamentally right. Even though it was tackling 2 different but related problems, they're sufficiently different you could get 2 papers out of it. I'm not salami slicing here. I'm just saying, look, there were basically you're at 2 different ends of abstraction. But the point is, your PC was, to me, my impression was it was internally inconsistent, right?
Yeah.
So you had the same PC saying, 2 papers that are obviously related, and one saying the solution is wrong, the other one saying for another paper the same-ish solution was right. And by solution, I mean the technique, right?
Yeah.
It's like saying you use quantitative typing to solve like some functional languages, and you use another one in, say, an orchestration language, right? But they're like, so they're 2 different problems, and that's right. And we need to try and provide that, and it's a hard thing, right? Because as conferences grow in terms of submissions, what can we do to do that? And these are open questions. I'm too junior enough to know what's the best way to do it, and there's things I probably haven't thought about. But you can sort of see this as community as a heads up. We need to be better at how we review papers to make sure that things don't go wrong, and that that papers get rejected for good reasons and not for bad reasons.
One thing that I've been thinking about is that I feel that one of the problems about reviewing is that I'm not 100% sure about this because I'm not a professor, but I have a feeling that service is not properly rewarded in their career, in the sense
No.
of a professor has, like a professor has so many different tasks at hand. They have to mentor their students, they have their meetings, they have to, like hire new professors, they have to do exams and do the classes and all of that. And service is, in my point of view, pretty much the last thing in line in terms of importance for things that will
Yeah.
keep them alive in academia for tomorrow, right? So
Yeah.
they don't have enough time to even do the reviewing,
Right.
right?
And so here's the other thing to add to this, right? It's now you look at the committees for ICFP for the last 5 iterations, for POPL last 5 iterations, you name it, 5 iterations ago, and you look at the variety of those who are serving on the committee, right? And by that I mean it's the same faces, more or less. You get some
Yeah,
new
yeah,
people bubbling up coming out, and it's the same faces. So
yeah.
whenever I hear somebody complain, "Oh, I've got so much reviewing to do," and I go, well, as a research associate, I go, hello, I'm here. I can serve on your committee. I can do reviewing, and it doesn't happen because you don't get chosen, right? And we have to. And so, if you want to look about, if you want to make the make the claim, and I don't think we are doing it here, is saying you get bad reviews because reviewers don't have enough time. It certainly does impact it, but it's not the be-all and end-all of why people give shit reviews. But we want to look at reviewer load. It's more papers, not an increase in reviewers. We see that at universities in terms of student numbers. Too many students for the numbers we have. And so some committees, we've seen this. If you look at it, this is like I feel like most of this podcast is more of a commentary on PL as a community, but that's fine. We're definitely planning to go back to the technical details later on. But the whole point is, it's right. How are we forming our committees to make sure that they can take on the load that is being presented in terms of numbers? We're hearing about record numbers of submissions, record numbers of rejection. I say record numbers, but a lot more papers are being submitted. A lot of them, and you still need people to review them. And we want to talk about service. So how can we get a committee and grow our community to have the ability to review these papers for the conferences, right? Regardless of journal mode, because a lot of conferences are now going for this multiple round, and that's fine. But how can we ensure that our committees are growing, that people aren't, that faculty are not burning out from the review load, as well as teaching load, as well as other service load? Because it's a lot of energy and effort to be a PC chair. You hear this from everyone, saying people get burnt out. As I said, like after they've done their intense, PC meetings, be it asynchronous, synchronous, whatever, they just want to say, like, I'm going on holiday for 2 weeks. Do not contact me, right? And even the same with people like standard committee members. How can we grow a committee? How can we grow the community so it's not just the same faces each time?
So how are they chosen to begin with?
Who
Who makes those choices?
And I think this is the thing. It's basically, unless you know the answer, you won't necessarily get this. And this is a bit about epistemic injustice, right? Unless you've known someone who's really active into the service, you might not necessarily get or be able to know where to look out for the information. So my understanding of the current trend, it's a grace and favor approach, which is it is by nomination. So the PC chair gets together and they have certain requirements in terms of who or what sort of person can and cannot serve on a committee. And they then go out and find people to serve. And so that's why I call it grace and favor, in that the PC chair has to find people. They have to it's not advertising, it's basically they will email people, like they might have a good idea of how to get a good balance across the PL community for the conference they're forming a committee for, and not just about topic balance, but say gender balance, maybe ethnic, not necessarily ethnic balance, but a good EDI, equality, diversity balance across the committee, and sometimes it's quite hard to do. Also, industry representation. They have to find people. And SIGPlan, they have documentation. I think it's not hard to find, but just unless you know where it is, have some information on how committees should be formed. But at the end of the day, it's all by asking someone to serve. And they can say no, and they can accept. Or they can say, look, here's this person. So the reason I got my service badges for serving on IFL and A+ committees is because, in one, the person that was asked said, no, I don't want to do it, I'm too busy. By the way, here's somebody else who could do it. And the other one, I was asked directly, but I don't know how I was chosen. Okay. I can sort of see why, because, I'm a postdoc. I am a research associate. I've got the skills to do it. But then somebody had to choose me. And I only got my co-chair of A+ Artifact Evaluation Committee is because I did service on other artifact evaluation committees, and a previous artifact evaluation chair said, oh, look, this person seemed to be quite interested in doing artifact evaluations. Let's, do the Peter Principle and promote them to the level of incompetence and actually run it for a change. And so that, and that's how you might get known. It's like, sorry, and this is going back to how committees form. Well, yeah, they ask you, but then why should, that might have been fine 15, 20 years ago, whatever. But now the community is so vast, are people being
Yeah.
missed out?
Yeah.
And then that's the key question is, if you just ask around, you might get suggestions of, here's this talented PhD student, or sorry, talented research associate or newly minted associate or assistant professor who had about 3 or 4 POPL papers or whatever, whatever, right, choose them, they look good, and that's okay. But then what about the person who is just equally as knowledgeable, might not be as well known as from say is not part of the main PL community
Yep.
just because of location?
Yep.
How do they get chosen? And they
Yeah.
don't, because they get
They don't.
forgotten about. And I've got a lovely anecdote about. So during COVID, PLDI 2020 was virtually in London last minute, and it was great because it democratized access to bigwig PL people, because it was all on Slack and so on. And I remember learning about how the Chi community, so Chi, the human computer or computer human interaction, said, right, they have call for nominations for, or they, at least at the time, and I hope they still do, is call for nominations for forming their PCs.
That's really cool.
And this was 2020. Artifact evaluation committees for years have call for nominations. We did a
Yep.
call for nominations saying, look, if you want to be part of the committee, and I've seen this before, if you want to be part, sign up. And I think that's
Yep.
great, because if you spam all the mailing lists, someone will say, oh my God, I can do this. I don't have to be asked. I can apply for it. If I don't get
Yep.
chosen, that's fine. But I have had the opportunity to apply for it. But we don't see the same about PCs. And so the reason why I mentioned PLDI, because I was in a chat with, you know, Benjamin Pierce, but the whole point is that if you're doing online, it's the Pac-Man situation, but all the time. And the Pac-Man is, if you're standing in the hallway track is best track, always leave a gap in your circle for somebody to come in. And if somebody comes in, stop making a gap. And
Yep.
on online, that gap is permanently there because anyone can pop in. And I said, look, I've heard about this Chi community. Can we make these changes to make people who are, say, on the edge of the PL community have opportunities for service, right? We're talking about opportunities, not guarantees. And Benjamin Pierce on Slack just said, oh, email Jens Paulsberg. So at the time, Jens Paulsberg was the SIGPlan chair. And I love this anecdote because, some of the time I would feel nervous emailing somebody like Jens, because this is the chair of SIGPlan. I'm just a research associate. Can I make a change? And will I be listened to? And that's your fear. If you're coming from outside, will you be listened to? And so I emailed Jens Paulsberg and I said, here's this wonderful idea. Can we do this? And he gave me some good pushback, making me aware of things I wasn't aware of. So, like committee formation, how they have to get the balance and ratios right for certain things, which is fair enough, right? But I said, right, okay, that's great. I'm quite junior. I was more or
No.
less a,
But
a newish parent at
we
the
don't
time, and
understand all the depth of the problem, and we have big dreams, and we want to change
yeah,
things, right? Yeah.
and so I linked Jens in with members of the SIG guy community who's responsible for PC Church. Like, right, I can't do this, but I want to do the introduction so that, we can try and do community knowledge transfer. Get community who knows what they're doing with us and give feedback to hopefully influence how SIGPlan does it. And I left it alone, and I regret that, not trying to push it, because my regret is, well, could I have had a long-lasting effect on SIGPlan if I pushed it? And that is, democratizing, how committees are formed by making them more open, right? But I didn't, and you can't look back in anger, right? But what was really nice about this tidbit is next year PLDI 21, there's a tweet by right, I'm going to butcher your name. I'm very sorry, not Pedro's name, but Isil Dilig from the University of, is it Texas or is it Austin, Texas? Anyway, she was program chair for PLDI 22, and it's a wonderful thing she did. She opened up the nominations for the committee, so that she had a Google form saying, if you want to be part of the PLDI program committee, apply. Right? You can self-nominate. you have to give some bona fides to make sure you're not just some crank. Well,
Mhm.
half of our community are cranks, but and I saw this and I was like, oh my god, it's happening. Did my talk with Jens Paulberg have some effect? And I don't think it was. I think it's just, as most things, it's just coincidence. I loved seeing that. Just like
Yep.
someday had the government say, let's open it up. But I don't think any other conference has done that in the PL community since then. And I want to be corrected. If I'm wrong, please tell me, because opening PCs for nominations so that you can apply to serve is wonderful, because I think that makes it accessible for those who are not known, who will never get asked because you're at some random university in Europe, America, not even those, like everyone knows them, but Latin America,
Yeah.
Africa, that, Oceania, Indonesia, all those states there, can we, bring these people who actually might know quite a lot of stuff and bring spirit, but also opening up providing new faces, new insights that we can then like train up. We can do these things, and that was great. And in the last couple of days, what we saw on social media is a call by, or the beginnings, what I hopefully is the right call of John, and yeah, I'm going to mispronounce it, Reger, who I in my head know as the cat professor from Utah, who is the PC chair for PLDI 23, is looking to do the same thing. Is saying, like, I want a call of nominations. Unfortunately, you need to have had a PhD awarded by November 23. Apparently, these are SIG plan regulations, which is fair enough. I'm not going to
Hmm.
question those, but that's cool. So that's twice in, or is it PLDI 20 or PLDI 24? Sorry, because I've already had PLDI 23. So that's twice for a top SIG plan conference of service by self-nomination. Now you can apply to serve, and that's cool, right? So that means now that if I wanted to serve, I don't have to say, look, sit in my chair and say, look, will the cat professor from Utah ask me to serve? Or will somebody he asks say, no, I'm not doing it, choose Jan, right? I can go up to him and say, hi, I'm here. Uh, if I look good, select me, and if not, that's fine. But I had a chance.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's the only thing we can do with our community. If we want to grow the number of reviewers, if you want to, and if you were worried about caliber, because somebody might say, well, we go for people who've submitted and have been published, they have the right caliber to be a reviewer. And I go, well, no, that's not true, because yes, they know what to do for the community, but that can also be an inherent knowledge. They know that it has to be this type of paper. They need to say, put a graph in if it's PLDI. And that's, and they know the right people who tell them that. But if you're from outside, then let's train them up.
Sometimes I feel that our, like PL academia, maybe academia in general, but PL academia in particular, I feel like I'm quite pessimistic here, but sometimes it feels like it's a crumbling castle that we're just trying to keep up. And the worst part is
Yeah,
that many of those things we are not trained to do. Many of those things that are our job as a PhD student, and after you graduate, you don't learn. For example, there is no formal training in my university, at least, and my friends' universities, about writing a paper. Like writing a paper in PL. There's no formal training in giving reviews. There is no
yeah,
formal training in like actually putting effort in the science behind how to build the community and how to build the
yeah.
community chair and things like that. So everything we do, it seems like it's somehow ad hoc, right? Like we're not actually putting the effort to
Yeah,
think
no,
and
no,
to train people into this. And that's a big
I,
part of the problem too, right?
yeah, no, absolutely. You're spot on the money there with that. It's because a lot of it is by osmosis and community
Right.
self-selection. And I'm not saying that the people who are chosen will be bad. It's just they were in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
And my biggest gripe is I know a few people who just know who, they did their PhD at the right institution to know the right person, and the right person wanted to say, I don't want to do this role, I'll hand it off to this other person who is capable. But that means, well, I could have done that role. And I'm not saying that's precisely what happened to me, but I'm just saying, like, but it's more about what I would like to see as a community is saying, can we open up the opportunities for service, the recording of institutional knowledge, and making it a bit more, uh, just making it better so that people learn how to write, learn how to review, be a bit more systemic in that. And things like the Programming Language Mentors Workshop is really great at that. But that's still a closed group, right?
It's still very short too. Like you're not
Short,
gonna
right?
learn how to write a paper in 1-2 hours, right?
No, but I think one of the things that I would love to see happen, and I don't know if it will, is to make, and I love the notion, and so there's this call from the SIG Arch community on how to revisit how they do conferences, like Jeff Foster,
Yeah.
uh, the Milner, was he Milner Award this year
I'm
holder?
not sure.
There's some, he had this big accolade for being the young Milner Researcher of the Year, and well done, congratulations for him on that. And part of the call they sort of said is like trying to flip the conference so that the conference is more about what you do in person, but a lot of the rest of it is asynchronous. So reading papers, watching presentations, things like that. You make the conference good for being in person, but you still want to celebrate people getting accepted, getting a paper accepted. And so read the call. I would suggest that for everyone. But the whole point I was making about that is with PL Mentors Workshop is, right, there's lots of things you can do well when you're in a group doing small group teaching. We all love small group teaching. It's done. But I love the notion of flipped classrooms, and a lot of the stuff we're talking about here at PLMW is that if you can get Ranjit Jala of San Diego, Santa Cruz, of his talk and presentations, it's really nice. Derek Dryer's talking how to write, it's really nice,
Yep.
but they have to give it year in, year out. And I go,
Yep.
well, fuck that. Don't do that. It's a waste of your fucking time. Let's flip it. Let's turn it into a MOOC. Let's make it available to all so that then when you do your workshops, you can do more concentrated effort of not saying, watch this presentation, be like, right, let's go over somebody's writing and let them improve it. Let's do more teaching things.
Yeah.
And I would love to be able to do all this. I'd love to be able to influence the community, but at the end of the day, I don't know who to ask and try and get involved because it's hard. Is there an opportunity to apply for saying PLMW, workshop organizer, if you want to be a social chair of PLDI or whatever, how do you apply for this? Right? But this goes back to, and this goes back to the whole, like we can improve the community, but we need to rethink of how we're doing things. And I know,
Oh yeah.
and this is the thing, this is my gripe, is that I want to, if people like, I'm certain because I am not I'm smart, but I'm certainly not the only one who have these ideas. But why aren't they bubbling up? Right? Why aren't we rethinking, being really crazy on thinking like, what if we make PMW like a MOOC or something like that, or whatever, just to sort of flip it so that we can open up how to do things. So like Benjamin Pierce recently released a course on writing that he does locally at
Oh yeah.
Penn.
Ben.
Yeah, and at Penn, and that was great because we're now starting opening up knowledge. We're opening up effectively open textbooks. Software Foundations is an open textbook. PILFA is an openish textbook. And when we talk about skills in how to review, skills in how to write, skills on X, Y, and Z, well, the knowledge is there. It's just it needs to be opened.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Sure.
and that's it. But this goes on to how to make service more penetrable. It's hard for people to break through. I think in the way it is, I would love to have had more service opportunities, but if and it's hard. It really annoys me because I think there's so many good people who will be great at this community, but they just can't push through, and so they have to leave. Like, or the people who do, and you get this like jealous or envious or jealous, saying people who do good things in community because they were in the right place at the right time, they got the ear of the right person. And I think, well, that shouldn't be the case. It's wonderful the impact that person has had, but what about the person who wasn't listened to, who wasn't able to follow through on the ideas, who could have had a similar impact, but because the community didn't just say, or they didn't have a champion.
So here's my
Yeah.
promise. I am your champion. This podcast is for you. If you think you don't have a voice, contact me. Let's talk. Come here. This is what I'm here for. I'm giving voices
Absolutely.
for people. So I think we are good on time for today, and we'll
Yep.
come back tomorrow. And
Yep.
is there any final thoughts, any like final remarks you would like to mention before we come back tomorrow?
Yeah, so a lot of the stuff we've been talking about is not necessarily being about PL, it's been about the community, but that I think we need to be more open and vocal about this, because I'm sick and tired of people complaining about Reviewer 2, but as a community not seeing more actions on addressing the Reviewer 2, because the Reviewer 2 is not some abstract figure from another university. It is the community. The community is its own Reviewer 2, and unless we make the changes, we're going to see it become more of a hierarchy, and I think more of a closed system. I need to be a bit more open about things. And a lot of the stuff I'm saying, and sometimes I can be a lot more vocal than I need to be, and sometimes I can put my foot in it. And I don't like to think that I know all the answers, but what I would like to see is community being a bit more receptive. And it could be that this might become the Peter Principle, and somebody might say, we've got this lovely service opportunity for you because you've been complaining so much about it, and I'll fail. But I don't want it to be this. I want to say, look, can we make, it's the campsite rule or the campfire rule, right? Leave the place better than you left it, right? And hopefully if I'm making these chimes to people and saying, or to community and people are listening, saying, look, and the right person says, let's change it, and say, look, don't involve me because I'm making the loudest noise. Involve me so we can get other people to contribute. It's not about me, right? I wish my career would have been a bit better. I wish my papers would have been accepted. I wish I had more opportunities. That's understated. But what I want is for the community to be more open and receptive, because we know it can be. That's the thing, we know it can be, and it's, there's a little bit of JFK's, don't ask what you can do for your country, ask what your country can do for you. Right? That's the JFK speech, right? And I would like to change, and I would like to see the community change. So, like, what can we do as a community, not just to benefit somebody like myself, but to people who are coming through the pipeline who might not necessarily have the same opportunities.
I love that.
Yeah.
Let's be the change we want to see in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Alright, that was it for today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed as much as I did. Don't forget that this was just the first half. The next half is going to come out next week or something. I don't know. As I mentioned the beginning of the episode, don't forget to check our Discord server. You can find the link in the website, typetheoryforall.com. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave in the website. You can send an email, typetheoryforall@gmail.com. Follow us at Twitter, @TTForAll, and do all those things. I love you guys. I love you guys as listeners. I hope you guys are still enjoying the show. And I have big plans to keep growing. So let's get into it or get out of it. I don't know. What do I usually say when I finish? I forgot. That's it.